Well, otherwise I just have to shout. I have to sit down once in a while because I've got a bad knee. And I'm really sorry, my Finnish is a bit rusty or non-existent, one might say. I'm very honored to be here. I have not in the impression that I have a lot of new, wonderful things because you're quite advanced here in Finland regarding sustainable public procurement, but I perhaps can give you some insights on how we do it in the Netherlands. My name is Sanne van Kampia. I'm a strategic procurement officer. I started my career as a lawyer, a legal advisor. Then I came into contact about procurement law, construction, contract law. And then I thought it's so wonderful that I really had a change in career and became more involved in public procurement. I've done it a couple of years, and now I'm a strategic advisor, strategic procurement officer. So that's a bit about my background. I'm not allowed to go anywhere without promoting my city, so therefore some nice pictures, but also, I'm gonna talk about a little bit about the introduction and a little bit about, I hope a lot about strategic public procurement. If you have any questions, there's time at the end of the presentation, but I'm from the Netherlands. I don't mind if you interrupt me and just ask me at the moment itself. So first I have to introduce a bit why I'm here. Talk about the City of Haarlem, also about the Urban Agenda Partnership, where KEINO and also Vanta is heavily involved in. And then I'm going to talk about the strategic public procurement, the way we approach it in the Netherlands, specifically in my city. And also I'm going to take two special topics and tell a bit more about it. The one is about social return on investment, how we can create jobs through public procurement, and the other one is about circular procurement, although I'm very much aware that there were several Finnish examples in a booklet from the European Commission in 2017 regarding circular procurement, but I'm going to tell you about how we're approaching it, and then a few examples. The City of Haarlem, it's a city in the western part of the Netherlands. It's a very old city. It's with a medieval townhouse. That's our town hall. That used to be a castle. Like I said, I need to have small promotion here. It's a provincial capital, although, and we have an administrative collaboration with a nearby municipality, which means that all the civil workers work for both municipalities. City of Haarlem has more than 160,000 inhabitants. City of, municipality of Zandvoort, something like 20,000. It's quite an affluent part of the Netherlands, and the spend just on procurement for the City of Haarlem is 330 million per year. And that's about infrastructure, social services, and things like ICT and office supplies and things like that. So that's a bit about the city. Also, I would like to tell one of the reasons why I came here. There's also a European partnership on innovative and responsible public procurement. The eastern Polish city of I forgot the name. Well, an Eastern Polish city is also involved. The city of Prague is also involved, but we have to adapt the picture because that's very recently. And KEINO, of course. So this partnership, and there's a small film about our partnership and what we're doing. I also have some booklets, and if you are interested to know more about it. So help.
public sector spends a huge amount of money on procurement, 2,000 billion euros. We want to spend this money responsibly. European cities face challenges on different levels. Public procurement can contribute to finding innovative and sustainable solutions to these challenges. This is our partnership. Our aim is to push forward procurement as a strategic driver to help cities make a positive impact. The partnership proposes to work on 7 actions to make this happen. It starts with building strategy. For example, how to go about circular procurement. Local competence centres provide the opportunity to exchange knowledge between public buyers on a practical level. To make full use of the market potential, an innovation broker brings buyers and suppliers together. Innovations ask for investments. Where do you find the funds? Understanding the legal framework allows you to use it to its full potential. Measuring the impact of spend, we come full circle. We believe that these actions will help European cities to make a positive impact. Together, we can make a difference.
Well, this shortly says what we're doing in the partnership. We really thrive from an urban level to talk about the challenges in public procurement. And it's called the Urban Agenda because for the first time in the history, one might say, of the European Union, it's that the cities are involved. It's about taking the challenges at an urban level. That's why it's called Urban Agenda. And it's all about strategic procurement. Well, what's strategic procurement? I take this picture to tell my politicians about strategic procurement, because everybody is participating in strategic procurement, perhaps not strategic public procurement, but the moment you're spending money, you're making a strategic decision on where you spend it on. And if you do not make a conscious decision, you make a subconscious decision. It's always a decision on what you spend your money on. If you want to buy, for example, a washing up liquid, you can think, well, I want to buy something that I think has the highest quality. Or I want something that's really cheap. Or I want something that's really ecological. It's all about washing up liquid. But where do you spend your money on? That's strategic procurement. Only thing is, if we talk about public procurement, we talk about, well, amounts of money I can only dream of. So the City of Haarlem has 330 million to spend a year. If we look at the metropolitan region of Amsterdam, we work together there with 32 different municipalities, 2 provinces and 1 transportation region. We talk about 4,000 million, which equals 4 billion annually. And if you look at the European public sector altogether, that really increases drastically about the amount of money. And so it's all about where and how do we want to spend the money. That brings us to what kind of goals do you have? Within the United Nations, there are sustainable development goals. I don't know if you've heard of them, if you implement them, if you work with them, but there are a lot of goals. And for example, goal number 12 is about responsible consumption and production. There comes the idea of, for example, circular procurement to mind. You have, the clean energy, the industry, innovation, and infrastructure. If you look at it, there are a lot of goals that you can use for setting up strategic public procurement. I'm just waiting, yeah. But how do we do it in the Netherlands? Well, there are some global goals we want to achieve, but we also have our own politicians. Every 4 years in the Netherlands, the city council has been will be elected, and the last one was in 2018. In the Netherlands, you don't have a majority, so there's always a political coalition needs to be formed. Part of that political coalition is they write a program on what they want to achieve for the next 4 years. That's also a guideline for the parties involved. So this is about general policy. It does not necessarily has to do something with procurement. It might be, but it's just a general policy, what the politicians want to achieve in the next 4 years or do in the next 4 years. That picture is the front page of our political program that was written last year in spring. And it's called Duurzaam doen. I don't know how your Dutch is, probably better than my Finnish, but it means do sustainable. And then below it, it's power or strength to a green, growing, social and livable Haarlem. So it's very much about sustainability, which is not that surprising if we look at the coalition, which means Green Party, the Labour Party, the Christian Democrats and the Social Liberals, but also Social Liberals with a very green image. So there's a lot to be said here. They really, one of the sentences in that program is sustainability is everything, but then in Dutch, of course. But sustainability is everything. So that's one of the things I'm taking into account. I'm not a policymaker. I'm a strategic advisor. I tell them, right, if that's your goal, perhaps it would be wise to implement it in such a way. And that's how we attack it. I'm not going to say that's the dot on the horizon. That's your end goal. That's not my cup of tea. That's the politicians who should write that down. And they have written it down. But that gives me direction on where to go. And then it's my job to translate that into public procurement, strategic public procurement. And then you have several strategic drivers to aim at. It might be social conditions in a global supply chain. For example, City of Haarlem is now collaborating with London, Barcelona, Stockholm in a European project to look at mobile phones. How can you look at the supply chain and specifically focus on the social conditions in that supply chain, which is, if you look at mobile phones, really a problem, which also has impact on the environment, because the people who are making those phones are not working in the best labor conditions and usually also with a lot of waste and chemicals, and that's really terrible. So we're seeing whether we can work together to change that. There's also social return on investment. I will get into that later. Green public procurement. I'm sure you're very good with that as well. Procurement of bio-based products, so we can also reduce waste, or at least non-ecological waste, I should say. Circular procurement, but also to see how can we make innovations and also opportunities for small and medium enterprises. One of the things that's not in this picture, it's about how can we stimulate local economy. My politicians want me to do something to help the local economy, but I cannot, and I've told them, we won't write down, we can only use enterprises from the City of Haarlem. We cannot do that. We won't do that because that would be against the law and all the rules and regulations. But there are certain things we can do. For example, what's keeping local enterprises from getting the contracts with us? Well, usually it's about knowledge. They don't know what we want. They don't know how to do it. They don't know where to find the information. So, for example, next week, I'm at a meeting where I tell social enterprises on how should you and can you get a contract from us. It's just information. It's public information. I'm not telling anything new. You can find it everywhere. So I'm not interfering with any level playing field. I'm just giving information. But that happened to be to the local enterprises. And in that way we can say, oh, do you know there's a European website, Tenders Electronic Daily, and if you look at what the City of Haarlem is publishing there, you might find some tender you might like. Oh, and by the way, please do take into account that 5 minutes too late will mean you won't get the contract. Just simple like that. Oh, don't be so, well, whatever kind of expletive you might think of. I'm like, well, I'm sorry, but that's the law. And if I grant you those 5 minutes, why shouldn't I grant you 10 minutes or 50 minutes? And why shouldn't I grant some other enterprise next year the same contract? I'm trying to explain what the thoughts are behind all the rules and regulations. I also tell them, if you have any questions, if you do not understand it, please ask for it. Go and ask with the request for information. Don't wait until you got the contract and think you can negotiate then. That's not going to happen. Just simple explaining what's the situation where we talk about, that really helps local enterprises getting the contract, because then they're like, really? Yes, really. And that helps them. And that way I can help the local politicians to achieve their goal in getting a better local economy without breaking the law. So that's one of the things that's also very important. Like I said, I'm going to look at 2 strategic procurement drivers, and I'm going to tell you what we're doing in the City of Haarlem. So far, so good? Social return on investment, that's something that we implement now for more than 10 years, I think, in the Netherlands. It's about using public procurement in a way to get an inclusive labor market. And it's about saying to, in a tender, yes, you can have this contract, but no, you need to use or you need to achieve those goals as well for a percentage. You should try to get unemployed people and help them work together. I go further on and I'm trying to really explain in detail what we're doing. But those are the policy goals. It's about contributing to an inclusive labor market and to have people work according to their ability, not above, but also not below. It's not like because you're unemployed or disabled or have not the highest IQ, or perhaps you need more instruction or a special working place, that should not be a reason to say, oh, you're not worth anything. We really want to help people, but also not give a handout, but really a job. That's the aim eventually. It used to be about getting more social return on your purchasing, on your investment. Then the crisis came and became more job related, also because of a part of the benefits in the Netherlands are paid by the city council themselves. So the politicians were like, oh, that's too much money. We have to do something about those benefits. So it was first just about anything that could contribute to the world, I might say. Then it became, because of the crisis, more about jobs. And now that the crisis is over and the job market is blooming, it's becoming more about social objectives itself. So then you see the fluctuation. How do we do it? Well, first you have the legal basis. That's always, as a lawyer, I'm like, is it allowed? Yes, it is. There are, in the directive, the European directive about public procurement, it says you have to have a link to the subject matter of the contract. If we're talking about, I don't know a good example right now, but if we're talking about like someone, the office furniture, we cannot say, well, but for the coffee, you serve in the plants where the workers are assembling the office furniture, you should have someone with a disability serving that coffee. The coffee that's served while the furniture is being assembled is too far away. It's not a link to the subject matter. The subject matter is the furniture, and it's not the coffee that's being given to the employees. So that's one thing. The other one is there are 3 ways to have this social return on investment. That's like as a minimum requirement, as an awarding criteria, and special terms and conditions of the performance. That's Article 70, by the way, for those who are interested in it. And we have regional policy about the goals, you just saw it, and a certain percentage. The percentage is necessary in order to implement it. So we have the legal basis in the directive and in a regional policy, so we know what's it all about. And regional policy is really several pages long about how we do it, how we implement it. And we also talk to our businesses, like that's one of our policy goals. So if I go and give information to the businesses, I also say, read that piece of information, because that's how we implement it. That's how we do it, and that means that if you get the contract, you have to do it. And we'll look at it in the contract management phase, whether you do it or not. So really, please read the policy, because it really specifies what we're doing. So that's the legal base. Then you have the tender. We always have to look, if we say something about social return on investment, is it proportionate to the object and the scope of the contract? Like I said, if we're talking about office furniture, we're not talking about how the coffee is being served for the employees. So first, is it proportionate? One of the things is if you purchase a good, then most of the time it's very difficult to have that social return on investment, because it's just about a certain object. And if there's a certain object, you cannot say, well, the labor of that certain object needs to be whatever. That's about the legal basis, where you cannot go too far. But even if you look at works and services, you can say, well, there's labor involved. So we're going to look whether it's about, you can include or create some jobs or some work experience. But you really have to look at it. For example, if you have to purchase a bridge, I don't know whether, if you have to purchase a bridge, if you just look, that's a work. But the labor component of the entire cost, the entire sum, is a fraction, is maybe 30%. But there are a lot of supplies, materials involved. So you cannot say, oh, I want 20 or 30% social return on investment. That will be too much, because the labor part of the entire contract value might be only 30%, and it needs to be high educational labor, because you need to know what you're doing when you're building a bridge. We would like to have a bridge that would not collapse afterwards, for example. So you really need to have higher labor. But even then, perhaps some people who are in school and need to have a training opportunity, you might have to you might be able to incorporate them in it. So you really have to look what's the subject matter, what's the contract, and how much can we do. And then you can calculate as we call a social return on investment value. I've made an example there. Let's say the contract value is 500,000 euros. We've established a social return value of 5%. That's a bit normal. That's one of the most normal percentages, is 5% of the contract value. Sometimes it can be 2%. And with the purchase of goods, it's usually 0, I might say. So then we have a social return value of 25,000. Right, great. Now we have a value. And what's next? Because, well, in the implementation part, so this is in the tender phase. Usually we just make it as a minimum requirement or a special condition of performance, where we say you need to implement 5% social return on investment. So then the tender offers comes in, yes, we're going to do 5%. Check. Right. They got the offer. Their offer's been accepted. What's next? Well, we have to calculate. Then we see the social return on investment value, in this example, it's 25,000. These are the building blocks. They're in Dutch, I hope, but these are all kind of situations, and this is something that progressed through the years. Like I said, we've been doing this over 10 years. By the way, I'm not going to claim that this is my thought. It was developed in another city, but it's now widely used in the Netherlands. These are all kind of situations. It might be WW means unemployment benefit. If you're unemployed for less than a year, your social return value, if you're being used by a contractor, is 10,000 euros. But if you're unemployed for more than a year, it's 15,000 euros, because you might need to have a catch-up on your knowledge on what you're doing, for example. Let's say Wajong, jong means young. Those are people who are, most of them are disabled from a very early age. That might be when they were young, they had an accident, or they're born that way. And they are a status where they never will be non-disabled, I can say. So that's usually, how can we help people who are in a wheelchair, for example? Because sometimes employers are like, oh, I don't want that. Well, why not, for example? These are all kind of things about training, internship, and it's about the value is about how much effort being required from the employers in order to help these people in the job. So the less value, the more likely it is that one in the situation might get a regular job. But the higher the value, it means how then the enterprise need to have more effort in order to help them. They might need guidance, or they might need some adjustments of the situation. It might be because they're autistic, they really need to have a working place with as minimal distraction as possible, for example. So this is about situations with a certain value attached to it. And it's also, if you have a contract that for several years, how long can you use that person in order to fulfill your social return value? Well, there are ones with a duration of 1 year, someone who's unemployed and who's has a work for 1 year. After 1 year, it's just a regular employee. It should not make any difference. If you see the Dutch word altijd, that means always, all the time. I should say, well, those are people who most likely always need some form of effort from the enterprises in order to keep on going on their job. So if you have someone who is from a sheltered accommodation, the WSW, then you always need to have an effort, have to help them as an employer. If we go on with our example, we had the example with the contract value for 500,000, the social return value of 5%, and then you have the social return value of 25,000. Well, just if we go about that example, suppose we have 3 offers. The first one says, yes, I'm going to do it. I'm going to hire one with a regular unemployment for less than a year. Right, we look at the scheme, we say that's a value of 10,000. And I'm also going to have one student from a special learning facility. That value is 15,000. So that social return value of 25,000, that's how I'm going to implement it. Offer number 2 says, no, I'm going to use one person from another situation, and that value is 30,000. And in that way, it will exceed the 25,000. Usually it's a minimum requirement, but that's okay. Wonderful, great. And people, perhaps enterprise number 2 chooses that, because if you look at the blue circle there, you will see the 30,000 has a duration for 5 years. He can use that one for 5 years in a row if you have a long-term contract. Or the third one is like, oh no, I don't want to have someone with unemployment, but I'm really good at the educational level. So I'm going to use 10 students and give them training and internship, or because that's a very small amount. It's only for 3 months, but maybe, I don't know, 3 or 4 students at a time. So this is that the requirement is you have to have the 5% social return value, but it's up to you as a business how you do that. And then that way you can choose as a business, as a private enterprise, what suits you best. And that gives them a sense of, well, we can choose a solution that's best for us. And in that way, it works. And it really works. I mean, there are always hiccups, but I can tell you in the Netherlands, it really works. That's an old statement, I should say, from a couple of years ago, from quite a big constructor in the Netherlands. And he said, well, it was starting, and I was like, oh, terrible. I should move on, I think. But it works. And if you look here, there are last year 667 people positively influenced by the way we do the social return on investment with a public procurement. And that's 667 people who are really have an impact. Although you can also see a large part of it is in the internship training for students, but also 140 people who were unemployed, but also someone who are like the Wajong, those are young handicapped people. 47 are getting a job or job experience or whatever. So I think that's really for politicians very good to know. And I'll have to move on. Next, circular procurement. Well, in 2017, the European Commission has a brochure about circular procurement, and I know there were several examples from Finland as well in it, so this can't be quite new to you, but linear economy, you put something in and something goes out, and that's waste. You have the reused economy, sustainable. Then you have a loop in the circle in the center about recycling, but circular economy is really aiming at no waste. And if you look at the circular economy chart, well, I never know whether it's left or right, but on that side of the screen, you see all kind of different circles. There's one circle not on it, and that's the main circle. A colleague of mine said it best: the best circular procurement is no procurement at all. To have an example, the desktop computers in my City of Haarlem are quite some years old. Technically, they're old. Do we need to buy new desktop computers, knowing that we're also talking about laptops, and also knowing that we have a good mainframe computer, and a lot of software are now in the cloud or on the mainframe computer. You only need a computer to access that. Do we need those desktop computers? Otherwise, then they're quite old, but they're working. Well, I think we don't. And that's the best public procurement, not looking at, oh, we need to buy something. No, it's there and it works, and well, why not use that one? So the best circular procurement is no procurement at all. But then you have the circulars, really look at the maintenance to prolong the life and go on. Due to the time, I'm a bit hurrying now. Difference between circular procurement, and I think this is really a key one, because when you have the traditional linear economy, it's all about rules and regulations from the public procurement department. It's about technical specifications. That's about it. What do you need to know from the market? Well, are there some updates and upgrades if we talk about ICT things? But that's all you need to know, the technical side. Then if we look at the sustainable public procurement, it's not just about the technical side. It's not just about the laws and rules and regulations. It's more about quality, but quality, not only technical quality, but also sustainable quality, as we call it. And then you need to engage with the market. We do talk a lot in the Netherlands with the market. That's really very much in our culture. But it's also something what you need to do in order to get to the right implementation. Tomorrow I'll attend a meeting with a lot of suppliers in the Netherlands about circular infrastructure. And we just talk with them. There's not a tender coming up, but we just talk to them. These are our policy goals. Give us input. What should we ask in a tender before we can implement it? How can you help us achieve our policy goals? And how can we work together? So that's just frequent market contact, just to know what's going on. But also in a tender, before we go out, or even during a tender, we talk about what kind of innovative products do you have? Just knowledge. We're not trying to change the level playing field, because that's really important. We also document what we're doing. So if someone asks, oh, that's not right what you're doing, is it legally viable? Yes, it is. And I can show you why and what we're doing. And if there are certain sets of information that everybody needs to know, we send it to everybody. We might publish it at site. So there are some rules, but with sustainable, you need to know what's going on. What kind of innovations are there in the market? When you talk about circular procurement, it's a whole different ball game, because then it's not only about purchasing, but it's also about contract management, but also about what do you do after your contract. Because it's not just, the contract is over, well, see you. No, because it's about circularity, there should not be any waste. So you always need to talk and to look at what's happening. So you need to have a very intensive market contact, and you need to have cooperation, collaboration. I don't know what's it here, but I know that in the Netherlands, a lot of public procurers are like us and them. Well, you can't have that when you're with a circular procurement. It should be all of us. And my experience is that there is risk aversion with also the businesses. They are also scared. But if you talk to them and explain what you're doing, yes, you can really create that. But that also means that as a public procurer, you should not only be about rules and regulation, not only about technical specifications, not only about sustainable goals, but also about relationship management. How can you build a relationship in order to get a partnership, to work together? And it's also very much organizational challenges. How can you get your stakeholders to work with this? Because it's also about, for example, the budget on purchasing and the budget on maintaining should be together, because otherwise you cannot have a good tender. Because the things you do about the purchase will affect the maintenance part. So the budget should be together. And so there are a lot of organizational challenges as well. This transformation has been recognized within my region. Though this is a collaboration, voluntarily, nothing obliged, but within the metropolitan region of Amsterdam. Like I said, 32 municipalities, 2 provinces, and 1 transportation region. And the politicians of that region are working together, and they have said, you know what, quite voluntarily, nothing, we're going to set a common goal. And one of the common goals is they want to be one of the most circular regions of Europe. Well, great. And they had the ambitions, we need to be 10% circular procurement in 2022, 50 in 25, and the aim, that's not a set goal, but an aim is 100% in 2030. Right, great. That means we had to work as civil workers to make this happen. Well, what did we do? This is a Zeppelin. That's a quite ancient transportation thing, but that's how we get to it. By the way, this was a basis of a roadmap that's been written, how to do it. How do we do that within the metropolitan region of Amsterdam? Well, we have the Zeppelin with circular procurement, the subject, the target, the goals. But we also recognize not every municipality can or is able or willing to go at the same speed or the same level of ambition. The main part is that we all move into the same direction, the right direction, but we want to give every municipality their own choice. What kind of level of ambition do you want? Do you want to have the sufficient level of ambition? Or do you want an advanced level of ambition? Or do you want an outstanding level of ambitions? I know, for example, if I look at my politicians, they won't go for the sufficient with the Green Party and all the environmental issues with a coalition programs that says sustainability is everything. So it will be either advanced or outstanding. And then why is there not... And why isn't it immediately outstanding? Because it needs to be implemented and you need to have the money to implement it. So that's one of the things, like, what do we do? Because the level of ambition really makes that you sign for certain actions, and those are called the engines, the drivers. That's why they got a Zeppelin with 3 engines. The actions on the organization in order, for example, you need to organized that the budgets of the purchase and the maintenance are together. Other thing is you need to have action on support and communication. It should never be something only for procurement department. It should be something for the entire organization. You should have the budget holders together, the management department. You really should have actions on how can you involve the rest of the organizations. And there are some specific actions on how to monitor and measure that you're getting to those targets of circular procurement. This resulted in this roadmap, and that is 80 pages long with all kind of, it's now in Dutch. I know they're talking about translating it in English with all kind of formats and things to it. It's with the basis chapters, and that's specifically for politicians and the higher management. Then you have the chapter 2, it's all about how to do it and with all kind of actions. And 3, it's about recommendations. And then you have the purple one, that's also about instruments, and you can click on those things and you have all kind of how to do it and formats and documents, and that can help you so we can all go in the same direction. And that's how we do it in the metropolitan region of Amsterdam. We had the very high political goals, and now we have the roadmap that really helps the procurement departments, the organizations who are member of that metropolitan region, how to do it and to work together in order to get it. I have several examples of strategic procurement. For example, I've told you about the social return on investment. We have a catering contract. Of course, with the catering contract in the tender, it said it has to be ecological and things like that. Well, in the catering contract, it was 5% social return on the investment value. It was also within the quality aspects, it was the higher social return on investment percentage you can achieve, the better. And it turned out we have now 10 new employees thanks to this contract who are they have how we call it, a distance toward the normal job market. For example, I like coffee. If we have a coffee bar, you can get there very good espresso, a very good cappuccino, and a very good latte, and perhaps tea. That's all there is. Don't ask for frappuccinos, whatever kind of thing. These are the one. The person behind that bar, very nice girl, very sociable, and she can make those 4 things. Don't ask her for the 5th thing, but those 4 things are really great. And you can have it and you can pay by card, because then she can just click on the register. I don't know, I think there's even a picture on it. He had this and this and this, and then it adds up by the machine and you just pay by card. She does not have to deal with money. But you have to pay for it. And that's one of the things, and she's a wonderful, very valuable employee now, whereas for a normal job, well, she might not get there because she cannot handle money. I don't know if she can read. I don't know that. It's not important for this job. So that's how we got 10 employees, but they also have a competitive salary. It's not a handout. They're really the lowest paid one is 70% above the minimum wage. So it's really a job. It's not anything else. The contract also had, within those 70% quality as an awarding criteria, it was, how can you help us to be more circular? Well, that resulted in a collaboration in the supply chain. We drink a lot of coffee, maybe not as much as the Finnish, but we also drink a lot of coffee. Coffee produces coffee drap. Normally, coffee drap is seen as waste. They thought it's not waste. So the paper processing company, about recycling the paper, is always driving the trucks with the old paper towards the processing plant, and then it goes back to get the new load of old paper. Now, there are some containers of coffee drop. He also put that in the truck. Not a lot of space it takes, but some. And then he has a very slight detour to a mushroom farm, very posh mushroom farm. And the mushroom farm uses the coffee drop to grow the mushrooms. Then it goes back, those mushrooms goes back to the city, to the caterer who makes it into a special croquette. It's a Dutch delicacy, and we eat them in our canteen. So that's one way how you can use a contract. That's one thing, because we ask them. I see Katarina, so my last example really is how can you engage the market in a tender in order to get the sustainable circular public procurement. We really thought about a framework agreement for the maintenance of infrastructure. And we said we want to use the knowledge and the innovation in the market. So in the request for the tender, we set a framework. This is what we want, technical specifications and things. And we set the policy goals. And the awarding criteria were about what can you do to help us achieve those policy goals. So the market needs to realize those goals, but we're not going to tell you how. That's up to you, what's best suiting for your business. And, well, what did that result? The reuse of the raw materials on site. Normally, it had to be transported 50 kilometers further and then back, but now it's on site. Local hub for raw materials, that does not sound perhaps that intimidating, but remember, this is a very highly dense area, a very urbanized area, an old area with a medieval part. So that was really something else. One of the things that really was good is that now the constructors are working together, and they've developed an app like a marketplace where they can say, oh, I have some stone street cobbles left. Does anyone need them? Or I have some building equipment that's not being used for the next couple of weeks. Does anyone want to use them? And also about, of course, you need to pay for that, but they're really trying to work together in order to reduce the waste, to implement the circularity. Of course, solar panel power construction check, but also electric building equipment, and not only the vehicles, but now also the heavy power lifting is also now being developed into electronics. And that's really, I think, very well, good, because normally you need a certain amount of power to lift things, and that always had to be diesel fueled. So I would like to tell you, work together, see the enterprises as a friend, as someone who can help you achieve goals. Now Katarina, I'm finished. Thank you.
I'd like to ask if you have some kind of review system on the level of this coalition program in total, because I think you said you have a 4-year term for this city council or this city parliament, but you had some aims that reached until the year of 2025 or 2030, something like that. So do you have a review system for the kind of the entire program? And also, we're interested in these review or follow-up systems of the goals or aims of separate procurement cases. That's how to follow up if the aims of specific certain competitions or purchasing cases are being fulfilled or not.
Those are two questions. One is about the specific tenders itself, and the other is about the overall view on how the policy goals are being met. And yes, they're both taken into account. We have, first to start about the specific tenders, we have a tender board who gives on a organizational level, they look at how the policy goals are being met regarding sustainable public procurement, and we have a meeting every month, and every year we have an evaluation about, if we look just at the purchasing calendar, this is being purchased, these were the goals, and these are whether it's been met or not. So that's on the managerial, high managerial level, it's being taken into account on every tender, where we also have to, then you have the roadmap for the circular procurement within the metropolitan region. One of the action is you need to have accountability in the financial reporting of the city. So that's one of the actions that within a couple of years we need to report very officially whether we've been met with the goals that are agreed upon within the metropolitan region. We in Haarlem even taking it a bit further, because we're also looking how can we budget towards a more circular and sustainable procurement, which means we won't only have a financial decision budgeting system, but also a sustainable decision budgeting system. So it's about not only this one is cheaper for better quality, but it's also we're now in the process to have a decision-making system about dear politicians, you can choose between option A or option B. That one is cheaper, but that one has less CO2 emissions, for example. Please tell us what do you want to choose. And in that way, because we also approach it as a budgeting thing, we also have to account for it in the budgeting reports about whether we're not achieving what we said we would. Because in the Netherlands we also work with coalition between political parties. There is not a lot of change between every election. It's not like America where it's either Republicans or Democrats. You always have certain parties who work together. So it's always a very moderate change between all the kind of coalitions normally. That means that although our politicians are only choose for 4 years, I do not expect a big change with the new election. So that's really very important if you have long-term goals, for example, with the circular procurement. But remember, within the metropolitan region of Amsterdam, there are also other municipalities, and some have, well, not a majority, but the biggest party might be the Conservatives, or they might be the populists, even that, and they're all on board. In those municipalities, I think they will aim for a sufficient level. Not the highest ambition, but the sufficient level. But the main part is how to keep them on board. So because of the coalition, we don't have a lot of change after the next elections, and we still can go and move forwards towards the long-term goals. That's
Thank you, Sanne, for a very interesting presentation. I would like to ask you how the actual management or leadership of procurement has changed. Have you objectives for the different departments kind of related to those strategically chosen areas? And you mentioned although that the budgeting issue is something which you are looking into further on, but could you tell us more about how management and leading strategic procurement has changed?
The secret microphone. Yes, you always have people who are not happy. You always will have them. There are certain things that, how we do it. One of the things we also have, well, our own KEINO. It's called Piano. That's been established, I think, almost 20 years ago. And it really is a very important factor in helping us. They really help us with the criteria, where they always have a legal check on the criteria, so we know if we use them, it's always good. So we can always tell them, no, we have to talk with those internal stakeholders and ask them, what are your objections? Why don't you want to do it? If it's about risk aversion, we can say, well, we have the criteria from the National Competence Center and they're already been checked. They work. So that's one thing. It's about risk aversion. Other ones are like, well, I don't have the budget for it. Good. That's why we have, for example, that sustainable decision-making system are being developed. How can we help you to get more budget if that's what it needs? Sometimes it does not need more budget. For example, waste processing is expensive. Just that, if waste processing is expensive, if you can work towards a circular procurement, you might need to invest first, but then you might reduce the cost of waste. But those costs are normally not budgeted for the procurement. So you really need to look at the organizational side of things. But that also means that from the procurement department or the strategic department, it's not about procurement anymore. You really need to tackle those organizational challenges and talk with them and also help them and explain what's going on. And one of the tips I would like to give is work with those who are enthusiastic. That's really, do not try to waste your energy on those who are opposed. Work with those who are enthusiastic. Then you might create an atmosphere where the others might like, oh, yes, we can work together. And then you might persuade those who are indecisive. And then at the very end, those who are opposed will need to come around. So that's how we do it. I hope that answers your question.